Chapter 1 of Prologues. I have heard of a dramatic writer who used to say he would rather write a play than a prologue. In like manner, I think, I can with less pains write one of the books of this history than the prefatory chapter to each of them. To say the truth, I believe many a hearty curse hath been devoted on the head of that author, who first instituted the method of prefixing to his play that portion of matter which is called the prologue, and which at first was part of the piece itself, but of latter years hath had usually so little connection with the drama before which it stands, that the prologue to one play might as well serve for any other. Those indeed of more modern date seem all to be written on the same three topics, viz., an abuse of the taste of the town, a condemnation of all contemporary authors, and an eulogium on the performance just about to be represented. The sentiments in all these are very little varied, nor is it possible they should. And indeed, I have often wondered at the great invention of authors, who have been capable of finding such various phrases to express the same thing. In like manner, I apprehend, some future historian, if anyone shall do me the honor of imitating my manner, will, after much scratching his pate, bestow some good wishes on my memory, for having first established these several initial chapters, most of which, like modern prologues, may as properly be prefixed to any other book in this history as to that which they introduce, or indeed to any other history as to this. But however authors may suffer by either of these inventions, the reader will find sufficient emolument in the one as the spectator hath long found in the other. First, it is well known that the prologue serves the critic for an opportunity to try his faculty of hissing, and to tune his catcall to the best advantage, by which means I have known those musical instruments so well prepared that they have been able to play in full concert at the first rising of the curtain. The same advantages may be drawn from these chapters, in which the critic will be always sure of meeting with something that may serve as a whetstone to his noble spirit, so that he may fall with a more hungry appetite for censure on the history itself. And here his sagacity must make it needless to observe how artfully these chapters are calculated for that excellent purpose. For in these, we have always taken care to intersperse somewhat of the sour or acid kind, in order to sharpen and stimulate the said spirit of criticism. Again, the indolent reader, as well as spectator, finds great advantage from both these. For, as they are not obliged either to see the one or read the others, and both the play and the book are thus protracted, by the former they have a quarter of an hour longer allowed them to sit at dinner, and by the latter they have the advantage of beginning to read at the fourth or fifth page instead of the first, a matter by no means of trivial consequence to persons who read books with no other view than to say they have read them, a more general motive to reading than is commonly imagined, and from which not only law books and good books, but the pages of Homer and Virgil, of Swift and Cervantes, have been often turned over. Many other are the emoluments which arise from both these, but they are for the most part so obvious that we shall not at present stay to enumerate them, especially since it occurs to us that the principal merit of both the prologue and the preface is that they be short. Chapter 2. A whimsical adventure which befell the squire, with the distressed situation of Sophia. We must now convey the reader to Mr. Western's lodgings, which were in Piccadilly, where he was placed by the recommendation of the landlord at the Hercules Pillars at Hyde Park Corner. For at the inn, which was the first he saw on his arrival in town, he placed his horses, and in those lodgings, which were the first he heard of, he deposited himself. Here, when Sophia alighted from the hackney coach, which brought her from the house of Lady Bellaston, she desired to retire to the apartment provided for her, to which her father very readily agreed, and whither he attended her himself. A short dialogue, neither very material nor pleasant to relate minutely, then passed between them, in which he pressed her vehemently to give her consent to the marriage with Blifil, who, as he acquainted her, was to be in town in a few days. But instead of complying, she gave a more peremptory and resolute refusal than she had ever done before. This so incensed her father, that after many bitter vows that he would force her to have him whether she would or no, he departed from her with many hard words and curses, locked the door, and put the key into his pocket. While Sophia was left with no other company than what attend the closest state prisoner, namely, fire and candle, the squire sat down to regale himself over a bottle of wine, with his parson and the landlord of the Hercules Pillars, who, as the squire said, would make an excellent third man, and could inform them of the news of the town, and how affairs went. For to be sure, says he knows a great deal, since the horses of many of the quality stand at his house. In this agreeable society, Mr. Western passed that evening and great part of the succeeding day, during which period nothing happened of sufficient consequence to find a place in this history. All this time Sophia passed by herself, for her father swore she should never come out of her chamber alive, unless she first consented to marry Blifil, nor did he ever suffer the door to be unlocked, unless to convey her food, on which occasions he always attended himself. The second morning after his arrival, while he and the parson were at breakfast together on a toast and tankard, he was informed that a gentleman was below to wait on him. "A gentleman," quoth the squire, "who the devil can he be?" "Do, doctor, go down and see who 'tis." "Mr. Blifil can hardly be come to town yet. Go down, do, and know what his business is." The doctor returned with an account that it was a very well-dressed man, and by the ribbon in his hat he took him for an officer of the army, that he said he had some particular business, which he could deliver to none but Mr. Western himself. "An officer," cries the squire, "what can any such fellow have to do with me? If he wants an order for baggage wagons, I am no justice of peace here, nor can I grant a warrant let come up then, if he must speak to me." A very genteel man now entered the room, who, having made his compliments to the squire and desired the favor of being alone with him, delivered himself as follows: "Sir, I come to wait upon you by the command of my Lord Felhammer, but with a very different message from what I suppose you expect, after what passed the other night." "My lord who?" cries the squire. "I never heard the name one." "His lordship," said the gentleman, "is willing to impute everything to the effect of liquor, and the most trifling acknowledgment of that kind will set everything right. For as he hath the most violent attachment to your daughter, you, sir, are the last person upon earth from whom he would resent an affront. And happy is it for you both that he hath given such public demonstrations of his courage as to be able to put up an affair of this kind without danger of any imputation on his honor. All he desires, therefore, is that you will before me make some acknowledgment. The slightest in the world will be sufficient, and he intends this afternoon to pay his respects to you, in order to obtain your leave of visiting the young lady on the footing of a lover." "I don't understand much of what you say, sir," said the squire, "but I suppose, by what you talk about my daughter, that this is the lord which my cousin, Lady Bellaston, mentioned to me, and said something about his courting my daughter. If so be that, how that be the case, you may give my service to his lordship, and tell the girl is disposed of already." "Perhaps, sir," said the gentleman, "you are not sufficiently apprised of the greatness of this offer." "I believe such a person, title, and fortune would be nowhere refused." "Look ye, sir," answered the squire, "to be very plain, my daughter is bespoke already. But if she was not, I would not marry her to a lord upon any account. I hate all lords. They are a parcel of courtiers and Hanoverians, and I will have nothing to do with them." "Well, sir," said the gentleman, "if that is your resolution, the message I am to deliver to you is that my lord desires the favor of your company this morning in Hyde Park." "You may tell my lord," answered the squire, "that I am busy and cannot come. I have enough to look after at home, and can't stir abroad on any account." "I am sure, sir," quoth the other, "you are too much a gentleman to send such a message. You will not, I am convinced, have it said of you, that, after having affronted a noble peer, you refuse him satisfaction. His lordship would have been willing, from his great regard to the young lady, to have made up matters in another way. But unless he is to look on you as a father, his honor will not suffer his putting up such an indignity as you must be sensible you offered him." "I offered him," cries the squire. "It is a d-end lie. I never offered him anything." Upon these words, the gentleman returned a very short verbal rebuke, and this he accompanied at the same time with some manual remonstrances, which no sooner reached the ears of Mr. Western than that worthy squire began to caper very briskly about the room, bellowing at the same time with all his might, as if desirous to summon a greater number of spectators to behold his agility. The parson, who had left great part of the tankard unfinished, was not retired far. He immediately attended, therefore, on the squire's vociferation, crying, "Bless me!" "Sir, what's the matter?" "Matter," quoth the squire. "Here's a highwayman, I believe, who wants to rob and murder me, for he hath fallen upon me with that stick there in his hand, when I wish I may be d-end if I get on the least provocation." "How, sir?" said the captain. "Did you not tell me I lied?" "No, as I hope to be saved," answered the squire. "I believe I might say, 'Twas a lie that I had offered any affront to my lord, but I never said the word. You lie." "I understand myself better, and you might have understood yourself better than to fall upon a naked man. If I had a stick in my hand, you would not have dared strike me. I'd have knocked thy lantern jaws about thy ears. Come down into yard this minute, and I'll take a bout with thee at single stick for a broken head, that I will, or I will go into naked room and box thee for a bellyful. At unt half a man, at unt, I'm sure." The captain, with some indignation, replied, "I see, sir, you are below my notice, and I shall inform his lordship you are below his. I am sorry I have dirtied my fingers with you." At which words he withdrew, the parson interposing to prevent the squire from stopping him, in which he easily prevailed, as the other, though he made some efforts for the purpose, did not seem very violently bent on success. However, when the captain was departed, the squire sent many curses and some menaces after him. But as these did not set out from his lips till the officer was at the bottom of the stairs, and grew louder and louder as he was more and more remote, they did not reach his ears, or at least did not retard his departure. Poor Sophia, however, who, in her prison, heard all her father's outcries from first to last, began now first to thunder with her foot, and afterwards to scream as loudly as the old gentleman himself had done before, though in a much sweeter voice. These screams soon silenced the squire, and turned all his consideration towards his daughter, whom he loved so tenderly, that the least apprehension of any harm happening to her threw him presently into agonies, for, except in that single instance in which the whole future happiness of her life was concerned, she was sovereign mistress of his inclinations. Having ended his rage against the captain, with swearing he would take the law of him, the squire now mounted upstairs to Sophia, whom, as soon as he had unlocked and opened the door, he found all pale and breathless. The moment, however, that she saw her father, she collected all her spirits, and catching him hold by the hand, she cried passionately, "Oh, my dear sir, I am almost frightened to death. I hope to heaven no harm hath happened to you." "No, no," cries the squire, "no great harm. The rascal hath not hurt me much, but rat me if I don't ha the law un. Pray, dear sir," says she, "tell me what's the matter. Who is it that hath insulted you?" "I don't know the name un," answered Western. "Some officer fellow, I suppose, that we are to pay for beating us, but I'll make him pay this bout if the rascal hath got anything, which I suppose he hath not. For though he was dressed out so fine, I question whether he had got a voot of land in the world. But, dear sir," cries she, "what was the occasion of your quarrel?" "What should it be, Sophy?" answered the squire, "but about you, Sophy. All my misfortunes are about you. You will be the death of your poor father at last. Here's a varlet of a lord, the Lord knows who forsooth, who hath a ton a liking to you, and because I would not gie un my consent, he sent me a challenge. Come, do be a good girl, Sophy, and put an end to all your father's troubles. Come, do consent to ha un. He will be in town within this day or two. Do but promise me to marry un as soon as he comes, and you will make me the happiest man in the world, and I will make you the happiest woman. You shall have the finest clothes in London, and the finest jewels, and a coach and six at your command. I promised Allworthy already to give up half my estate od rabbit it. I should hardly stick at giving up the whole. Will my papa be so kind," says she, "as to hear me speak?" "Why, wout ask, Sophy," cries he, "when dost know I had rather hear thy voice than the music of the best pack of dogs in England hear thee, my dear little girl? I hope I shall hear thee as long as I live, for if I was ever to lose that pleasure, I would not gie a brass varden to live a moment longer. Indeed, Sophy, you do not know how I love you, indeed you don't, or you never could have run away and left your poor father, who hath no other joy, no other comfort upon earth, but his little Sophy." At these words the tears stood in his eyes, and Sophia, with the tears streaming from hers, answered, "Indeed, my dear papa, I know you have loved me tenderly, and heaven is my witness how sincerely I have returned your affection. Nor could anything but an apprehension of being forced into the arms of this man have driven me to run from a father whom I love so passionately, that I would, with pleasure, sacrifice my life to his happiness. Nay, I have endeavored to reason myself into doing more, and had almost worked up a resolution to endure the most miserable of all lives, to comply with your inclination. It was that resolution alone to which I could not force my mind, nor can I ever. Here the squire began to look wild, and the foam appeared at his lips, which Sophia, observing, begged to be heard out, and then proceeded. If my father's life, his health, or any real happiness of his was at stake, here stands your resolved daughter. May heaven blast me if there is a misery I would not suffer to preserve you. No, that most detested, most loathsome of all lots would I embrace. I would give my hand to Blifil for your sake. I tell thee it will preserve me, answers the father. It will give me health, happiness, life, everything upon my soul. I shall die if dost refuse me. I shall break my heart, I shall upon my soul. Is it possible, says she, you can have such a desire to make me miserable? I tell thee, Noah, answered he loudly, D.N. me if there is a thing upon earth I would not do to see thee happy. And will not my dear papa allow me to have the least knowledge of what will make me so? If it be true that happiness consists in opinion, what must be my condition when I shall think myself the most miserable of all the wretches upon earth? Better think yourself so, said he, than know it by being married to a poor bastardly vagabond. If it will content you, sir, said Sophia, I will give you the most solemn promise never to marry him, nor any other, while my papa lives without his consent. Let me dedicate my whole life to your service. Let me be again your poor Sophie, and my whole business and pleasure be, as it hath been, to please and divert you. Look'ee, Sophie, answered the squire, I am not to be choused in this manner. Your Aunt Western would then have reason to think me the fool she doth. No, no, Sophie, I'd have you to know I have got more wisdom, and no more of the world, than to take the word of a woman in a matter where a man is concerned. How, sir, have I deserved this want of confidence? Said she. Have I ever broke a single promise to you? Or have I ever been found guilty of a falsehood from my cradle? Look'ee, Sophie, cries he, that's neither here nor there. I am determined upon this match, and have him you shall, D.N. me if shat unt. D.N. me if shat unt, thou dost hang thyself the next morning. At repeating which words he clinched his fist, knit his brows, bit his lips, and thundered so loud that the poor afflicted, terrified Sophia sunk trembling into her chair, and had not a flood of tears come immediately to her relief, perhaps worse had followed. Western beheld the deplorable condition of his daughter with no more contrition or remorse than the turnkey of Newgate feels at viewing the agonies of a tender wife, when taking her last farewell of her condemned husband. Or rather, he looked down on her with the same emotions which arise in an honest fair tradesman, who sees his debtor dragged to prison for £10, which, though a just debt, the wretch is wickedly unable to pay. Or, to hit the case still more nearly, he felt the same compunction with a bawd, when some poor innocent, whom she hath ensnared into her hands, falls into fits at the first proposal of what is called seeing company. Indeed, this resemblance would be exact, was it not that the bawd hath an interest in what she doth, and the father, though perhaps he may blindly think otherwise, can, in reality, have none in urging his daughter to almost an equal prostitution. In this condition he left his poor Sophia, and departing with a very vulgar observation on the effect of tears, he locked the room, and returned to the parson, who said everything he durst in behalf of the young lady, which, though perhaps it was not quite so much as his duty required, yet was it sufficient to throw the squire into a violent rage, and into many indecent reflections on the whole body of the clergy, which we have too great an honor for that sacred function to commit to paper. Chapter 3. What happened to Sophia during her confinement? The landlady of the house, where the squire lodged, had begun very early to entertain a strange opinion of her guests. However, as she was informed that the squire was a man of vast fortune, and as she had taken care to exact a very extraordinary price for her rooms, she did not think proper to give any offense. For though she was not without some concern for the confinement of poor Sophia, of whose great sweetness of temper and affability the maid of the house had made so favorable a report, which was confirmed by all the squire's servants. Yet she had much more concern for her own interest than to provoke one, whom, as she said, she perceived to be a very hastish kind of a gentleman. Though Sophia eat but little, yet she was regularly served with her meals. Indeed, I believe if she had liked anyone rarity, that the squire, however angry, would have spared neither pains nor cost to have procured it for her. Since, however strange it may appear to some of my readers, he really doted on his daughter, and to give her any kind of pleasure was the highest satisfaction of his life. The dinner hour being arrived, Black George carried her up a pullet, the squire himself, for he had sworn not to part with the key attending the door. As George deposited the dish, some compliments passed between him and Sophia, for he had not seen her since she left the country, and she treated every servant with more respect than some persons show to those who are in a very slight degree their inferiors. Sophia would have had him take the pullet back, saying she could not eat, but George begged her to try and particularly recommended to her the eggs, of which he said it was full. All this time the squire was waiting at the door, but George was a great favorite with his master, as his employment was in concerns of the highest nature, namely, about the game, and was accustomed to take many liberties. He had officiously carried up the dinner, being, as he said, very desirous to see his young lady. He made therefore no scruple of keeping his master standing above 10 minutes, while civilities were passing between him and Sophia, for which he received only a good-humored rebuke at the door when he returned. The eggs of pullets, partridges, pheasants, and sea were, as George well knew, the most favorite dainties of Sophia. It was therefore no wonder that he, who was a very good-natured fellow, should take care to supply her with this kind of delicacy, at a time when all the servants in the house were afraid she would be starved, for she had scarce swallowed a single morsel in the last 40 hours. Though vexation hath not the same effect on all persons as it usually hath on a widow, whose appetite it often renders sharper than it can be rendered by the air on Banstead Downs or Salisbury Plain. Yet the sublimest grief, notwithstanding what some people may say to the contrary, will eat at last. And Sophia, herself, after some little consideration, began to dissect the fowl, which she found to be as full of eggs as George had reported it. But if she was pleased with these, it contained something which would have delighted the Royal Society much more. For if a fowl with 3 legs be so invaluable a curiosity, when perhaps time hath produced 1,000 such, at what price shall we esteem a bird which so totally contradicts all the laws of animal economy as to contain a letter in its belly? Ovid tells us of a flower into which Hyacinthus was metamorphosed, that bears letters on its leaves, which Virgil recommended as a miracle to the Royal Society of his day. But no age nor nation hath ever recorded a bird with a letter in its maw. But though a miracle of this kind might have engaged all the Academies des Sciences in Europe, and perhaps in a fruitless enquiry, yet the reader, by barely recollecting the last dialogue which passed between Messrs. Jones and Partridge, will be very easily satisfied from whence this letter came, and how it found its passage into the fowl. Sophia, notwithstanding her long fast, and notwithstanding her favorite dish was there before her, no sooner saw the letter than she immediately snatched it up, tore it open, and read as follows. Madam, was I not sensible to whom I have the honor of writing, I should endeavor, however difficult, to paint the horrors of my mind at the account brought me by Mrs. Honor. But as tenderness alone can have any true idea of the pangs which tenderness is capable of feeling, so can this most amiable quality, which my Sophia possesses in the most eminent degree, sufficiently inform her what her Jones must have suffered on this melancholy occasion. Is there a circumstance in the world which can heighten my agonies, when I hear of any misfortune which hath befallen you? Surely there is one only, and with that I am accursed. It is, my Sophia, the dreadful consideration that I am myself the wretched cause. Perhaps I here do myself too much honor, but none will envy me an honor which costs me so extremely dear. Pardon me this presumption, and pardon me a greater still if I ask you, whether my advice, my assistance, my presence, my absence, my death, or my tortures can bring you any relief. Can the most perfect admiration, the most watchful observance, the most ardent love, the most melting tenderness, the most resigned submission to your will, make you amends for what you are to sacrifice to my happiness? If they can, fly, my lovely angel, to those arms which are ever open to receive and protect you, and to which, whether you bring yourself alone or the riches of the world with you, is, in my opinion, an alternative not worth regarding. If, on the contrary, wisdom shall predominate, and on the most mature reflection inform you that the sacrifice is too great, and if there be no way left to reconcile your father and restore the peace of your dear mind, but by abandoning me, I conjure you drive me forever from your thoughts, exert your resolution, and let no compassion for my sufferings bear the least weight in that tender bosom. Believe me, madam, I so sincerely love you better than myself, that my great and principal end is your happiness. My first wish, why would not fortune indulge me in it? Was, and pardon me if I say, still is, to see you every moment the happiest of women. My second wish is, to hear you are so. But no misery on earth can equal mine, while I think you owe an uneasy moment to him who is, madam, in every sense, and to every purpose, your devoted. Thomas Jones. What Sophia said, or did, or thought, upon this letter, how often she read it, or whether more than once, shall all be left to our reader's imagination. The answer to it he may perhaps see hereafter, but not at present. For this reason, among others, that she did not now write any, and that for several good causes, one of which was this: she had no paper, pen, nor ink. In the evening, while Sophia was meditating on the letter she had received, or on something else, a violent noise from below disturbed her meditations. This noise was no other than a round bout at altercation between two persons. One of the combatants, by his voice, she immediately distinguished to be her father, but she did not so soon discover the shriller pipes to belong to the organ of her Aunt Western, who was just arrived in town, where having, by means of one of her servants, who stopped at the Hercules Pillars, learned where her brother lodged, she drove directly to his lodgings. We shall therefore take our leave at present of Sophia, and, with our usual good breeding, attend her ladyship. Chapter 4. In which Sophia is delivered from her confinement. The squire and the parson, for the landlord was now otherwise engaged, were smoking their pipes together, when the arrival of the lady was first signified. The squire no sooner heard her name, than he immediately ran down to usher her upstairs, for he was a great observer of such ceremonials, especially to his sister, of whom he stood more in awe than of any other human creature, though he never would own this, nor did he perhaps know it himself. Mrs. Western, on her arrival in the dining-room, having flung herself into a chair, began thus to harangue. Well, surely, no one ever had such an intolerable journey. I think the roads, since so many turnpike acts, are grown worse than ever. Law, brother, how could you get into this odious place? No person of condition, I dare swear, ever set foot here before. I don't know, cries the squire. I think they do well enough. It was landlord recommended them. I thought, as he knew most of the quality, he could best show me where to get among 'em. Well, and where's my niece? Says the lady. Have you been to wait upon Lady Bellaston yet? Aye, cries the squire, your niece is safe enough. She is upstairs in chamber. How? Answered the lady. Is my niece in this house, and does she not know of my being here? No, nobody can well get to her, says the squire, for she is under lock and key. I have her safe. I fetched her from my lady cousin the first night I came to town, and I have taken care o' her ever since. She is as secure as a fox in a bag, I promise you. Good heaven, returned Mrs. Western, what do I hear? I thought what a fine piece of work would be the consequence of my consent to your coming to town yourself. Nay, it was indeed your own headstrong will, nor can I charge myself with having ever consented to it. Did not you promise me, brother, that you would take none of these headstrong measures? Was it not by these headstrong measures that you forced my niece to run away from you in the country? Have you a mind to oblige her to take such another step? ZDS and the devil, cries the squire, dashing his pipe on the ground. Did ever mortal hear the like? When I expected you would have commended me for all I have done, to be fallen upon in this manner. How, brother, said the lady, have I ever given you the least reason to imagine I should commend you for locking up your daughter? Have I not often told you that women in a free country are not to be treated with such arbitrary power? We are as free as the men, and I heartily wish I could not say we deserve that freedom better. If you expect I should stay a moment longer in this wretched house, or that I should ever own you again as my relation, or that I should ever trouble myself again with the affairs of your family, I insist upon it that my niece be set at liberty this instant. This she spoke with so commanding an air, standing with her back to the fire, with one hand behind her, and a pinch of snuff in the other, that I question whether Thalestris, at the head of her Amazons, ever made a more tremendous figure. It is no wonder, therefore, that the poor squire was not proof against the awe which she inspired. There, he cried, throwing down the key. There it is, do whatever you please. I intended only to have kept her up till Blifil came to town, which can't be long, and now if any harm happens in the meantime, remember who is to be blamed for it. I will answer it with my life, cried Mrs. Western, but I shall not intermeddle at all, unless upon one condition, and that is, that you will commit the whole entirely to my care, without taking any one measure yourself, unless I shall eventually appoint you to act. If you ratify these preliminaries, brother, I yet will endeavor to preserve the honor of your family. If not, I shall continue in a neutral state. I pray you, good sir, said the parson, permit yourself this once to be admonished by her ladyship. Peradventure, by communing with young Madam Sophia, she will effect more than you have been able to perpetrate by more rigorous measures. What, dost thee open upon me? Cries the squire. If thee dost begin to babble, I shall whip thee in presently. Fie, brother, answered the lady, is this language to a clergyman? Mr. Supple is a man of sense, and gives you the best advice, and the whole world, I believe, will concur in his opinion. But I must tell you I expect an immediate answer to my categorical proposals. Either cede your daughter to my disposal, or take her wholly to your own surprising discretion, and then I hear, before Mr. Supple, evacuate the garrison and renounce you and your family forever. I pray you let me be a mediator, cries the parson. Let me supplicate you. Why, there lies the key on the table, cries the squire. She may take on up if she pleases. Who hinders her? No, brother, answered the lady. I insist on the formality of its being delivered me, with a full ratification of all the concessions stipulated. Why then I will deliver it to you their tease, cries the squire. I am sure, sister, you can't accuse me of ever denying to trust my daughter to you. She hath a-lived you a whole year and more to a time, without my ever seeing her. And it would have been happy for her, answered the lady, if she had always lived with me. Nothing of this kind would have happened under my eye. Aye, certainly, cries he, I only am to blame. Why, you are to blame, brother, answered she. I have been often obliged to tell you so, and shall always be obliged to tell you so. However, I hope you will now amend, and gather so much experience from past errors, as not to defeat my wisest machinations by your blunders. Indeed, brother, you are not qualified for these negotiations. All your whole scheme of politics is wrong. I once more, therefore, insist that you do not intermeddle. Remember only what is past. ZDS and BLD, sister, cries the squire, what would you have me say? You are enough to provoke the devil. There now, said she, just according to the old custom. I see, brother, there is no talking to you. I will appeal to Mr. Supple, who is a man of sense, if I said anything which could put any human creature into a passion, but you are so wrong-headed every way. Let me beg you, madam, said the parson, not to irritate his worship. Irritate him, said the lady. Sure, you are as great a fool as himself. Well, brother, since you have promised not to interfere, I will once more undertake the management of my niece. Lord have mercy upon all affairs, which are under the directions of men. The head of one woman is worth 1,000 of yours. And now having summoned a servant to show her to Sophia, she departed, bearing the key with her. She was no sooner gone than the squire, having first shut the door, ejaculated 20 bitches, and as many hearty curses against her, not sparing himself for having ever thought of her estate, but added, Now one hath been a slave so long, it would be pity to lose it at last, for want of holding out a little longer. The bitch can't live forever, and I know I am down for it upon the will." The parson greatly commended this resolution, and now the squire, having ordered in another bottle, which was his usual method when anything either pleased or vexed him, did, by drinking plentifully of this medicinal julep, so totally wash away his choler, that his temper was become perfectly placid and serene when Mrs. Western returned with Sophia into the room. The young lady had on her hat and capuchin, and the aunt acquainted Mr. Western that she intended to take her niece with her to her own lodgings, "For indeed, brother," says she, "these rooms are not fit to receive a Christian soul in." "Very well, madam," quoth Western, "whatever you please. The girl can never be in better hands than yours, and the parson here can do me the justice to say that I have said 50 times behind your back that you was one of the most sensible women in the world." "To this," cries the parson, "I am ready to bear testimony." "Nay, brother," says Mrs. Western, "I have always, I'm sure, given you as favorable a character. You must own you have a little too much hastiness in your temper, but when you will allow yourself time to reflect, I never knew a man more reasonable." "Why then, sister, if you think so," said the squire, "here's your good health with all my heart. I am a little passionate sometimes, but I scorn to bear any malice. Sophie, do you be a good girl, and do everything your aunt orders you." "I have not the least doubt of her," answered Mrs. Western. "She hath had already an example before her eyes in the behavior of that wretch her cousin Harriet, who ruined herself by neglecting my advice. Oh, brother, what think you? You was hardly gone out of hearing, when you set out for London, when who should arrive but that impudent fellow with the odious Irish name, that Fitzpatrick. He broke in abruptly upon me without notice, or I would not have seen him. He ran on a long, unintelligible story about his wife, to which he forced me to give him a hearing, but I made him very little answer, and delivered him the letter from his wife, which I bid him answer himself. I suppose the wretch will endeavor to find us out, but I beg you will not see her, for I am determined I will not." "I see her," answered the squire. "You need not fear me. I'll gie no encouragement to such undutiful wenches. It is well for the fellow, her husband, I was not at Hume. Odd rabbit it, he should have taken a dance through the horse pond, I promise un. You see, Sophie, what undutifulness brings volks to. You have an example in your own family. Brother, cries the aunt, you need not shock my niece by such odious repetitions. Why would you not leave everything entirely to me? Well, well, I wull, said the squire. And now Mrs. Western, luckily for Sophia, put an end to the conversation by ordering chairs to be called. I say luckily, for had it continued much longer, fresh matter of dissension would, most probably, have arisen between the brother and sister, between whom education and sex made the only difference. For both were equally violent and equally positive. They had both a vast affection for Sophia, and both a sovereign contempt for each other. Chapter 5, in which Jones receives a letter from Sophia, and goes to a play with Mrs. Miller and Partridge. The arrival of Black George in town, and the good offices which that grateful fellow had promised to do for his old benefactor, greatly comforted Jones, in the midst of all the anxiety and uneasiness which he had suffered on the account of Sophia, from whom, by the means of the said George, he received the following answer to his letter, which Sophia, to whom the use of pen, ink, and paper was restored with her liberty, wrote the very evening when she departed from her confinement. Sir, as I do not doubt your sincerity in what you write, you will be pleased to hear that some of my afflictions are at an end, by the arrival of my Aunt Western, with whom I am at present, and with whom I enjoy all the liberty I can desire. One promise my aunt hath insisted on my making, which is, that I will not see or converse with any person without her knowledge and consent. This promise I have most solemnly given, and shall most inviolably keep. And though she hath not expressly forbidden me writing, yet that must be an omission from forgetfulness, or this, perhaps, is included in the word conversing. However, as I cannot but consider this as a breach of her generous confidence in my honor, you cannot expect that I shall, after this, continue to write myself or to receive letters without her knowledge. A promise is with me a very sacred thing, and to be extended to everything understood from it, as well as to what is expressed by it. And this consideration may, perhaps, on reflection, afford you some comfort. But why should I mention a comfort to you of this kind? For though there is one thing in which I can never comply with the best of fathers, yet am I firmly resolved never to act in defiance of him, or to take any step of consequence without his consent. A firm persuasion of this must teach you to divert your thoughts from what fortune hath, perhaps, made impossible. This your own interest persuades you. This may reconcile, I hope, Mr. Allworthy to you, and if it will, you have my injunctions to pursue it. Accidents have laid some obligations on me, and your good intentions probably more. Fortune may, perhaps, be some time kinder to us both than at present. Believe this, that I shall always think of you as I think you deserve, and am, sir, your obliged humble servant, Sophia Western. I charge you write to me no more at present at least, and accept this, which is now of no service to me, which I know you must want, and think you owe the trifle only to that fortune by which you found it. Asterisk, asterisk, meaning, perhaps, the bank bill for £100. A child who hath just learnt his letters would have spelt this letter out in less time than Jones took in reading it. The sensations it occasioned were a mixture of joy and grief, somewhat like what divide the mind of a good man when he peruses the will of his deceased friend, in which a large legacy, which his distresses make the more welcome, is bequeathed to him. Upon the whole, however, he was more pleased than displeased, and indeed the reader may probably wonder that he was displeased at all. But the reader is not quite so much in love as was poor Jones, and love is a disease which, though it may, in some instances, resemble a consumption, which it sometimes causes, in others proceeds in direct opposition to it, and particularly in this, that it never flatters itself, or sees any one symptom in a favorable light. One thing gave him complete satisfaction, which was, that his mistress had regained her liberty, and was now with a lady where she might at least assure herself of a decent treatment. Another comfortable circumstance was the reference which she made to her promise of never marrying any other man. For however disinterested he might imagine his passion, and notwithstanding all the generous overtures made in his letter, I very much question whether he could have heard a more afflicting piece of news than that Sophia was married to another, though the match had been never so great, and never so likely to end in making her completely happy. That refined degree of platonic affection which is absolutely detached from the flesh, and is, indeed, entirely and purely spiritual, is a gift confined to the female part of the creation, many of whom I have heard declare, and doubtless with great truth, that they would, with the utmost readiness, resign a lover to a rival, when such resignation was proved to be necessary for the temporal interest of such lover. Hence, therefore, I conclude that this affection is in nature, though I cannot pretend to say I have ever seen an instance of it. Mr. Jones, having spent 3 hours in reading and kissing the aforesaid letter, and being, at last, in a state of good spirits, from the last-mentioned considerations, he agreed to carry an appointment, which he had before made, into execution. This was to attend Mrs. Miller and her younger daughter into the gallery at the playhouse, and to admit Mr. Partridge as one of the company. For as Jones had really that taste for humor which many affect, he expected to enjoy much entertainment in the criticisms of Partridge, from whom he expected the simple dictates of nature, unimproved, indeed, but likewise unadulterated by art. In the first row, then, of the first gallery did Mr. Jones, Mrs. Miller, her youngest daughter, and Partridge take their places. Partridge immediately declared it was the finest place he had ever been in. When the first music was played, he said, it was a wonder how so many fiddlers could play at one time without putting one another out. While the fellow was lighting the upper candles, he cried out to Mrs. Miller, "Look, look, madam, the very picture of the man in the end of the common prayer book before the gunpowder treason service." Nor could he help observing, with a sigh, when all the candles were lighted, that here were candles enough burnt in one night to keep an honest poor family for a whole 12-month. As soon as the play, which was Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, began, Partridge was all attention, nor did he break silence till the entrance of the ghost, upon which he asked Jones, "What man that was in the strange dress, something," said he, "like what I have seen in a picture." "Sure it is not armor, is it?" Jones answered. "That is the ghost." To which Partridge replied with a smile, "Persuade me to that, sir, if you can. Though I can't say I ever actually saw a ghost in my life, yet I am certain I should know one, if I saw him, better than that comes to. No, no, sir, ghosts don't appear in such dresses as that neither." In this mistake, which caused much laughter in the neighborhood of Partridge, he was suffered to continue, till the scene between the ghost and Hamlet, when Partridge gave that credit to Mr. Garrick, which he had denied to Jones, and fell into so violent a trembling that his knees knocked against each other. Jones asked him what was the matter, and whether he was afraid of the warrior upon the stage. "Ola, sir," said he, "I perceive now it is what you told me. I am not afraid of anything, for I know it is but a play. And if it was really a ghost, it could do one no harm at such a distance, and in so much company, and yet if I was frightened, I am not the only person." "Why, who," cries Jones, "dost thou take to be such a coward here besides thyself? Nay, you may call me coward if you will, but if that little man there upon the stage is not frightened, I never saw any man frightened in my life." "I, go along with you, I to be sure. Whose fool then, will you? Lud have mercy upon such foolhardiness. Whatever happens, it is good enough for you follow you. I'd follow the devil as soon. Nay, perhaps it is the devil, for they say he can put on what likeness he pleases. Oh, here he is again no farther. No, you have gone far enough already, farther than I'd have gone for all the king's dominions." Jones offered to speak, but Partridge cried, "Hush, hush. Dear sir, don't you hear him?" And during the whole speech of the ghost, he sat with his eyes fixed partly on the ghost and partly on Hamlet, and with his mouth open, the same passions which succeeded each other in Hamlet, succeeding likewise in him. When the scene was over, Jones said, "Why, Partridge, you exceed my expectations. You enjoy the play more than I conceived possible." "Nay, sir," answered Partridge, "if you are not afraid of the devil, I can't help it. But to be sure, it is natural to be surprised at such things, though I know there is nothing in them. Not that it was the ghost that surprised me, neither, for I should have known that to have been only a man in a strange dress. But when I saw the little man so frightened himself, it was that which took hold of me." "And dost thou imagine then, Partridge," cries Jones, "that he was really frightened?" "Nay, sir," said Partridge, "did not you yourself observe afterwards, when he found it was his own father's spirit, and how he was murdered in the garden, how his fear forsook him by degrees, and he was struck dumb with sorrow, as it were, just as I should have been, had it been my own case? But hush. Oh la, what noise is that? There he is again. Well, to be certain, though I know there is nothing at all in it, I am glad I am not down yonder, where those men are." Then turning his eyes again upon Hamlet, "Aye, you may draw your sword. What signifies a sword against the power of the devil?" During the second act, Partridge made very few remarks. He greatly admired the fineness of the dresses, nor could he help observing upon the king's countenance. "Well," said he, "how people may be deceived by faces. Nulla fid's fronti is, I find, a true saying. Who would think by looking in the king's face that he had ever committed a murder?" He then inquired after the ghost, but Jones, who intended he should be surprised, gave him no other satisfaction than that he might possibly see him again soon and in a flash of fire. Partridge sat in a fearful expectation of this, and now, when the ghost made his next appearance, Partridge cried out, "There, sir, now, what say you now? Is he frightened now or no?" "As much frightened as you think me, and to be sure, nobody can help some fears. I would not be in so bad a condition as what's his name, Squire Hamlet, is there, for all the world. Bless me, what's become of the spirit? As I am a living soul, I thought I saw him sink into the earth." "Indeed, you saw right," answered Jones. "Well, well," cries Partridge, "I know it is only a play, and besides, if there was anything in all this, Madam Miller would not laugh so. For as to you, sir, you would not be afraid, I believe, if the devil was here in person there, no wonder you are in such a passion, shake the vile, wicked wretch to pieces. If she was my own mother, I would serve her so. To be sure, all duty to a mother is forfeited by such wicked doings. Go about your business. I hate the sight of you." Our critic was now pretty silent till the play, which Hamlet introduces before the king. This he did not at first understand, till Jones explained it to him. But he no sooner entered into the spirit of it than he began to bless himself that he had never committed murder. Then turning to Mrs. Miller, he asked her if she did not imagine the king looked as if he was touched, "though he is," said he, "a good actor, and doth all he can to hide it." "Well, I would not have so much to answer for, as that wicked man there hath, to sit upon a much higher chair than he sits upon. No wonder he ran away. For your sake I'll never trust an innocent face again." The grave-digging scene next engaged the attention of Partridge, who expressed much surprise at the number of skulls thrown upon the stage. To which Jones answered that it was one of the most famous burial places about town. "No wonder, then," cries Partridge, "that the place is haunted. But I never saw in my life a worse grave-digger. I had a sexton, when I was clerk, that should have dug 3 graves while he is digging one. The fellow handles a spade, as if it was the first time he had ever had one in his hand. You may sing. You had rather sing than work, I believe." Upon Hamlet's taking up the skull, he cried out, "Well, it is strange to see how fearless some men are. I never could bring myself to touch anything belonging to a dead man. On any account he seemed frightened enough too at the ghost, I thought." Nemo omnibus horis sapit. Little more worth remembering occurred during the play, at the end of which Jones asked him which of the players he had liked best. To this he answered, with some appearance of indignation at the question, "The king, without doubt." "Indeed, Mr. Partridge," says Mrs. Miller, "you are not of the same opinion with the town, for they are all agreed that Hamlet is acted by the best player who ever was on the stage." "He the best player?" cries Partridge with a contemptuous sneer. "Why, I could act as well as he myself. I am sure, if I had seen a ghost, I should have looked in the very same manner, and done just as he did. And then, to be sure, in that scene, as you called it, between him and his mother, where you told me he acted so fine, why, Lord help me, any man, that is, any good man that had such a mother, would have done exactly the same. I know you are only joking with me, but indeed, madam, though I was never at a play in London, yet I have seen acting before in the country, and the king for my money. He speaks all his words distinctly, half as loud again as the other anybody may see he is an actor." While Mrs. Miller was thus engaged in conversation with Partridge, a lady came up to Mr. Jones, whom he immediately knew to be Mrs. Fitzpatrick. She said she had seen him from the other part of the gallery, and had taken that opportunity of speaking to him, as she had something to say, which might be of great service to himself. She then acquainted him with her lodgings, and made him an appointment the next day in the morning, which, upon recollection, she presently changed to the afternoon, at which time Jones promised to attend her. Thus ended the adventure at the playhouse, where Partridge had afforded great mirth, not only to Jones and Mrs. Miller, but to all who sat within hearing, who were more attentive to what he said than to anything that passed on the stage. He durst not go to bed all that night, for fear of the ghost, and for many nights after sweated 2 or 3 hours before he went to sleep with the same apprehensions, and waked several times in great horrors, crying out, "Lord, have mercy upon us." There it is. Chapter 6, in which the history is obliged to look back. It is almost impossible for the best parent to observe an exact impartiality to his children, even though no superior merit should bias his affection. But sure, a parent can hardly be blamed when that superiority determines his preference. As I regard all the personages of this history in the light of my children, so I must confess the same inclination of partiality to Sophia, and for that I hope the reader will allow me the same excuse from the superiority of her character. This extraordinary tenderness which I have for my heroine never suffers me to quit her any long time without the utmost reluctance. I could now, therefore, return impatiently to inquire what hath happened to this lovely creature since her departure from her father's, but that I am obliged first to pay a short visit to Mr. Blifil. Mr. Western, in the first confusion into which his mind was cast upon the sudden news he received of his daughter, and in the first hurry to go after her, had not once thought of sending any account of the discovery to Blifil. He had not gone far, however, before he recollected himself, and accordingly stopped at the very first inn he came to, and dispatched away a messenger to acquaint Blifil with his having found Sophia, and with his firm resolution to marry her to him immediately, if he would come up after him to town. As the love which Blifil had for Sophia was of that violent kind, which nothing but the loss of her fortune, or some such accident, could lessen, his inclination to the match was not at all altered by her having run away, though he was obliged to lay this to his own account. He very readily, therefore, embraced this offer. Indeed, he now proposed the gratification of a very strong passion besides avarice, by marrying this young lady, and this was hatred. For he concluded that matrimony afforded an equal opportunity of satisfying either hatred or love, and this opinion is very probably verified by much experience. To say the truth, if we are to judge by the ordinary behavior of married persons to each other, we shall perhaps be apt to conclude that the generality seek the indulgence of the former passion only, in their union of everything but of hearts. There was one difficulty, however, in his way, and this arose from Mr. Allworthy. That good man, when he found by the departure of Sophia, for neither that, nor the cause of it, could be concealed from him, the great aversion which she had for his nephew, began to be seriously concerned that he had been deceived into carrying matters so far. He by no means concurred with the opinion of those parents, who think it as immaterial to consult the inclinations of their children in the affair of marriage, as to solicit the good pleasure of their servants when they intend to take a journey, and who are by law or decency at least, withheld often from using absolute force. On the contrary, as he esteemed the institution to be of the most sacred kind, he thought every preparatory caution necessary to preserve it holy and inviolate, and very wisely concluded that the surest way to effect this was by laying the foundation in previous affection. Blifil indeed soon cured his uncle of all anger on the score of deceit, by many vows and protestations that he had been deceived himself, with which the many declarations of Western very well tallied. But now to persuade Allworthy to consent to the renewing his addresses was a matter of such apparent difficulty, that the very appearance was sufficient to have deterred a less enterprising genius. But this young gentleman so well knew his own talents, that nothing within the province of cunning seemed to him hard to be achieved. Here, then, he represented the violence of his own affection, and the hopes of subduing aversion in the lady by perseverance. He begged that, in an affair on which depended all his future repose, he might at least be at liberty to try all fair means for success. Heaven forbid, he said, that he should ever think of prevailing by any other than the most gentle methods. Besides, sir, said he, if they fail, you may then, which will be surely time enough, deny your consent. He urged the great and eager desire which Mr. Western had for the match, and lastly, he made great use of the name of Jones, to whom he imputed all that had happened, and from whom, he said, to preserve so valuable a young lady was even an act of charity. All these arguments were well seconded by Thwackum, who dwelt a little stronger on the authority of parents than Mr. Blifil himself had done. He ascribed the measures which Mr. Blifil was desirous to take to Christian motives, and though, says he, the good young gentleman hath mentioned charity last, I am almost convinced it is his first and principal consideration. Square, possibly, had he been present, would have sung to the same tune, though in a different key, and would have discovered much moral fitness in the proceeding, but he was now gone to Bath for the recovery of his health. Allworthy, though not without reluctance, at last yielded to the desires of his nephew. He said he would accompany him to London, where he might be at liberty to use every honest endeavour to gain the lady. But I declare, said he, I will never give my consent to any absolute force being put on her inclinations, nor shall you ever have her, unless she can be brought freely to compliance. Thus did the affection of Allworthy for his nephew betray the superior, understanding to be triumphed over by the inferior. And thus is the prudence of the best of heads often defeated by the tenderness of the best of hearts. Blifil, having obtained this unhoped-for acquiescence in his uncle, rested not till he carried his purpose into execution. And as no immediate business required Mr. Allworthy's presence in the country, and little preparation is necessary to men for a journey, they set out the very next day, and arrived in town that evening, when Mr. Jones, as we have seen, was diverting himself with Partridge at the play. The morning after his arrival, Mr. Blifil waited on Mr. Western, by whom he was most kindly and graciously received, and from whom he had every possible assurance, perhaps more than was possible, that he should very shortly be as happy as Sophia could make him. Nor would the squire suffer the young gentleman to return to his uncle till he had, almost against his will, carried him to his sister. Chapter 7, in which Mr. Western pays a visit to his sister, in company with Mr. Blifil. Mrs. Western was reading a lecture on prudence and matrimonial politics to her niece, when her brother and Blifil broke in with less ceremony than the laws of visiting require. Sophia no sooner saw Blifil than she turned pale, and almost lost the use of all her faculties, but her aunt, on the contrary, waxed red, and having all her faculties at command, began to exert her tongue on the squire. "Brother," said she, "I am astonished at your behavior. Will you never learn any regard to decorum? Will you still look upon every apartment as your own, or as belonging to one of your country tenants? Do you think yourself at liberty to invade the privacies of women of condition without the least decency or notice?" "Why, what a pox is the matter now?" quoth the squire. "One would think I had caught you at none of your brutality, sir, I beseech you," answered she. "You have surprised my poor niece so, that she can hardly, I see, support herself. Go, my dear, retire, and endeavour to recruit your spirits, for I see you have occasion." At which words Sophia, who never received a more welcome command, hastily withdrew. "To be sure, sister," cries the squire, "you are mad, when I have brought Mr. Blifil here to court her, to force her away." "Sure, brother," says she, "you are worse than mad, when you know in what situation affairs are, to I am sure I ask Mr. Blifil's pardon, but he knows very well to whom to impute so disagreeable a reception. For my own part, I am sure I shall always be very glad to see Mr. Blifil, but his own good sense would not have suffered him to proceed so abruptly, had you not compelled him to it." Blifil bowed and stammered and looked like a fool, but Western, without giving him time to form a speech for the purpose, answered, "Well, well, I am to blame, if you will, I always am, certainly. But come, let the girl be fetched back again, or let Mr. Blifil go to her. He's come up on purpose, and there is no time to be lost." "Brother," cries Mrs. Western, "Mr. Blifil, I am confident, understands himself better than to think of seeing my niece any more this morning, after what hath happened. Women are of a nice contexture, and our spirits, when disordered, are not to be recomposed in a moment. Had you suffered Mr. Blifil to have sent his compliments to my niece, and to have desired the favour of waiting on her in the afternoon, I should possibly have prevailed on her to have seen him, but now I despair of bringing about any such matter." "I am very sorry, madam," cried Blifil, "that Mr. Western's extraordinary kindness to me, which I can never enough acknowledge, should have occasioned—" "Indeed, sir," said she, interrupting him, "you need make no apologies. We all know my brother so well." "I don't care what anybody knows of me," answered the squire, "but when must he come to see her? For consider, I tell you, he is come up on purpose, and so is Allworthy." "Brother," said she, "whatever message Mr. Blifil thinks proper to send to my niece shall be delivered to her, and I suppose she will want no instructions to make a proper answer. I am convinced she will not refuse to see Mr. Blifil at a proper time." "The devil she won't," answered the squire. "Oddsbud, don't we know I say nothing, but some Volk are wiser than all the world. If I might have had my will, she had not run away before, and now I expect to hear every moment she is gone again. For as great a fool as some Volk think me, I know very well she hates." "No matter, brother," replied Mrs. Western, "I will not hear my niece abused. It is a reflection on my family. She is an honor to it, and she will be an honor to it, I promise you. I will pawn my whole reputation in the world on her conduct. I shall be glad to see you, brother, in the afternoon, for I have somewhat of importance to mention to you at present. Mr. Blifil, as well as you, must excuse me, for I am in haste to dress." "Well, but," said the squire, "do appoint a time." "Indeed," said she, "I can appoint no time." "I tell you I will see you in the afternoon." "What the devil would you have me do?" cries the squire, turning to Blifil. "I can no more turn her than a beagle can turn an old hare." "Perhaps you will be in a better humor in the afternoon." "I am condemned, I see, sir, to misfortune," answered Blifil, "but I shall always own my obligations to you." He then took a ceremonious leave of Mrs. Western, who was altogether as ceremonious on her part, and then they departed, the squire muttering to himself with an oath that Blifil should see his daughter in the afternoon. If Mr. Western was little pleased with this interview, Blifil was less. As to the former, he imputed the whole behavior of his sister to her humor only, and to her dissatisfaction at the omission of ceremony in the visit. But Blifil saw a little deeper into things. He suspected somewhat of more consequence from 2 or 3 words which dropped from the lady, and to say the truth, he suspected right, as will appear when I have unfolded the several matters which will be contained in the following chapter. Chapter 8. Schemes of Lady Bellaston for the ruin of Jones. Love had taken too deep a root in the mind of Lord Fellamar to be plucked up by the rude hands of Mr. Western. In the heat of resentment, he had, indeed, given a commission to Captain Egline, which the captain had far exceeded in the execution. Nor had it been executed at all, had his lordship been able to find the captain after he had seen Lady Bellaston, which was in the afternoon of the day after he had received the affront. But so industrious was the captain in the discharge of his duty, that, having after long inquiry found out the squire's lodgings very late in the evening, he sat up all night at a tavern, that he might not miss the squire in the morning, and by that means missed the revocation which my lord had sent to his lodgings. In the afternoon, then, next after the intended rape of Sophia, his lordship, as we have said, made a visit to Lady Bellaston, who laid open so much of the character of the squire, that his lordship plainly saw the absurdity he had been guilty of in taking any offence at his words, especially as he had those honourable designs on his daughter. He then unbosomed the violence of his passion to Lady Bellaston, who readily undertook the cause, and encouraged him with certain assurance of a most favourable reception from all the elders of the family, and from the father himself when he should be sober, and should be made acquainted with the nature of the offer made to his daughter. The only danger, she said, lay in the fellow she had formerly mentioned, who, though a beggar and a vagabond, had, by some means or other, she knew not what, procured himself tolerable clothes, and passed for a gentleman. "Now," says she, "as I have, for the sake of my cousin, made it my business to inquire after this fellow, I have luckily found out his lodgings," with which she then acquainted his lordship. "I am thinking, my lord," added she, "for this fellow is too mean for your personal resentment, whether it would not be possible for your lordship to contrive some method of having him pressed and sent on board a ship. Neither law nor conscience forbid this project, for the fellow, I promise you, however well dressed, is but a vagabond, and as proper as any fellow in the streets to be pressed into the service. And as for the conscientious part, surely the preservation of a young lady from such ruin is a most meritorious act. Nay, with regard to the fellow himself, unless he could succeed, which heaven forbid with my cousin, it may probably be the means of preserving him from the gallows, and perhaps may make his fortune in an honest way." Lord Fellamar very heartily thanked her ladyship for the part which she was pleased to take in the affair, upon the success of which his whole future happiness entirely depended. He said he saw at present no objection to the pressing scheme, and would consider of putting it in execution. He then most earnestly recommended to her ladyship to do him the honour of immediately mentioning his proposals to the family, to whom, he said, he offered a carte blanche, and would settle his fortune in almost any manner they should require. And after uttering many ecstasies and raptures concerning Sophia, he took his leave and departed, but not before he had received the strongest charge to beware of Jones, and to lose no time in securing his person, where he should no longer be in a capacity of making any attempts to the ruin of the young lady. The moment Mrs. Western was arrived at her lodgings, a card was dispatched with her compliments to Lady Bellaston, who no sooner received it than, with the impatience of a lover, she flew to her cousin, rejoiced at this fair opportunity, which beyond her hopes offered itself. For she was much better pleased with the prospect of making the proposals to a woman of sense, and who knew the world, than to a gentleman whom she honored with the appellation of Hottentot. Though, indeed, from him she apprehended no danger of a refusal. The two ladies being met, after very short previous ceremonials, fell to business, which was indeed almost as soon concluded as begun. For Mrs. Western no sooner heard the name of Lord Fellamar than her cheeks glowed with pleasure. But when she was acquainted with the eagerness of his passion, the earnestness of his proposals, and the generosity of his offer, she declared her full satisfaction in the most explicit terms. In the progress of their conversation, their discourse turned to Jones, and both cousins very pathetically lamented the unfortunate attachment which both agreed Sophia had to that young fellow, and Mrs. Western entirely attributed it to the folly of her brother's management. She concluded, however, at last, with declaring her confidence in the good understanding of her niece, who, though she would not give up her affection in favor of Blifil, will, I doubt not, says she, soon be prevailed upon to sacrifice a simple inclination to the addresses of a fine gentleman, who brings her both a title and a large estate. For indeed, added she, I must do Sophie the justice to confess this Blifil is but a hideous kind of fellow, as you know, Bellaston, all country gentlemen are, and hath nothing but his fortune to recommend him. Nay, said Lady Bellaston, I don't then so much wonder at my cousin, for I promise you this Jones is a very agreeable fellow, and hath one virtue, which the men say is a great recommendation to us. What do you think? Mrs. Western I shall certainly make you laugh. Nay, I can hardly tell you myself for laughing will you believe that the fellow hath had the assurance to make love to me. But if you should be inclined to disbelieve it, here is evidence enough, his own handwriting, I assure you. She then delivered her cousin the letter with the proposals of marriage, which, if the reader hath a desire to see, he will find already on record in the XVTH book of this history. Upon my word I am astonished, said Mrs. Western. This is, indeed, a masterpiece of assurance. With your leave I may possibly make some use of this letter. You have my full liberty, cries Lady Bellaston, to apply it to what purpose you please. However, I would not have it shewn to any but Miss Western, nor to her unless you find occasion. Well, and how did you use the fellow? Returned Mrs. Western. Not as a husband, said the lady. I am not married, I promise you, my dear. You know, Belle, I have tried the comforts once already, and once, I think, is enough for any reasonable woman. This letter Lady Bellaston thought would certainly turn the balance against Jones in the mind of Sophia, and she was emboldened to give it up, partly by her hopes of having him instantly dispatched out of the way, and partly by having secured the evidence of honor, who, upon sounding her, she saw sufficient reason to imagine was prepared to testify whatever she pleased. But perhaps the reader may wonder why Lady Bellaston, who in her heart hated Sophia, should be so desirous of promoting a match which was so much to the interest of the young lady. Now, I would desire such readers to look carefully into human nature, page almost the last, and there he will find, in scarce legible characters, that women, notwithstanding the preposterous behavior of mothers, aunts, and in matrimonial matters, do in reality think it so great a misfortune to have their inclinations in love thwarted, that they imagine they ought never to carry enmity higher than upon these disappointments. Again, he will find it written much about the same place, that a woman who hath once been pleased with the possession of a man will go above halfway to the devil to prevent any other woman from enjoying the same. If he will not be contented with these reasons, I freely confess I see no other motive to the actions of that lady, unless we will conceive she was bribed by Lord Fellamar, which for my own part I see no cause to suspect. Now this was the affair which Mrs. Western was preparing to introduce to Sophia, by some prefatory discourse on the folly of love, and on the wisdom of legal prostitution for hire, when her brother and Blifil broke abruptly in upon her. And hence arose all that coldness in her behavior to Blifil, which, though the squire, as was usual with him, imputed to a wrong cause, infused into Blifil himself, he being a much more cunning man, a suspicion of the real truth. Chapter 9, in which Jones pays a visit to Mrs. Fitzpatrick. The reader may now, perhaps, be pleased to return with us to Mr. Jones, who, at the appointed hour, attended on Mrs. Fitzpatrick. But before we relate the conversation which now passed, it may be proper, according to our method, to return a little back, and to account for so great an alteration of behavior in this lady, that from changing her lodging principally to avoid Mr. Jones, she had now industriously, as hath been seen, sought this interview. And here we shall need only to resort to what happened the preceding day, when, hearing from Lady Bellaston that Mr. Western was arrived in town, she went to pay her duty to him at his lodgings at Piccadilly, where she was received with many scurvy compilations too coarse to be repeated, and was even threatened to be kicked out of doors. From hence, an old servant of her Aunt Western, with whom she was well acquainted, conducted her to the lodgings of that lady, who treated her not more kindly, but more politely, or, to say the truth, with rudeness in another way. In short, she returned from both, plainly convinced, not only that her scheme of reconciliation had proved abortive, but that she must forever give over all thoughts of bringing it about by any means whatever. From this moment, desire of revenge only filled her mind, and in this temper, meeting Jones at the play, an opportunity seemed to her to occur of effecting this purpose. The reader must remember that he was acquainted by Mrs. Fitzpatrick, in the account she gave of her own story, with the fondness Mrs. Western had formerly shewn for Mr. Fitzpatrick at Bath, from the disappointment of which Mrs. Fitzpatrick derived the great bitterness her aunt had expressed toward her. She had, therefore, no doubt but that the good lady would as easily listen to the addresses of Mr. Jones as she had before done to the other, for the superiority of charms was clearly on the side of Mr. Jones, and the advance which her aunt had since made in age, she concluded, how justly I will not say, was an argument rather in favor of her project than against it. Therefore, when Jones attended, after a previous declaration of her desire of serving him, arising, as she said, from a firm assurance how much she should by so doing oblige Sophia, and after some excuses for her former disappointment, and after acquainting Mr. Jones in whose custody his mistress was, of which she thought him ignorant, she very explicitly mentioned her scheme to him, and advised him to make sham addresses to the older lady, in order to procure an easy access to the younger, informing him at the same time of the success which Mr. Fitzpatrick had formerly owed to the very same stratagem. Mr. Jones expressed great gratitude to the lady for the kind intentions towards him which she had expressed, and indeed testified, by this proposal. But, besides intimating some diffidence of success from the lady's knowledge of his love to her niece, which had not been her case in regard to Mr. Fitzpatrick, he said, he was afraid Miss Western would never agree to an imposition of this kind, as well from her utter detestation of all fallacy as from her avowed duty to her aunt. Mrs. Fitzpatrick was a little nettled at this, and indeed, if it may not be called a lapse of the tongue, it was a small deviation from politeness in Jones, and into which he scarce would have fallen, had not the delight he felt in praising Sophia hurried him out of all reflection, for this commendation of one cousin was more than a tacit rebuke on the other. "Indeed, sir," answered the lady, with some warmth, "I cannot think there is anything easier than to cheat an old woman with a profession of love, when her complexion is amorous, and though she is my aunt, I must say there never was a more liquorish one than her ladyship. Can't you pretend that the despair of possessing her niece, from her being promised to Blifil, has made you turn your thoughts towards her? As to my cousin Sophia, I can't imagine her to be such a simpleton as to have the least scruple on such an account, or to conceive any harm in punishing one of these hags for the many mischiefs they bring upon families by their tragicomic passions, for which I think it is a pity they are not punishable by law. I had no such scruple myself, and yet I hope my cousin Sophia will not think it an affront when I say she cannot detest every real species of falsehood more than her cousin Fitzpatrick. To my aunt, indeed, I pretend no duty, nor doth she deserve any. However, sir, I have given you my advice, and if you decline pursuing it, I shall have the less opinion of your understanding, that's all. Jones now clearly saw the error he had committed and exerted his utmost power to rectify it, but he only faltered and stuttered into nonsense and contradiction. To say the truth, it is often safer to abide by the consequences of the first blunder than to endeavor to rectify it. For by such endeavors we generally plunge deeper instead of extricating ourselves. And few persons will, on such occasions, have the good nature which Mrs. Fitzpatrick displayed to Jones, by saying, with a smile, "You need attempt no more excuses, for I can easily forgive a real lover, whatever is the effect of fondness for his mistress." She then renewed her proposal, and very fervently recommended it, omitting no argument which her invention could suggest on the subject. For she was so violently incensed against her aunt that scarce anything was capable of affording her equal pleasure with exposing her. And like a true woman, she would see no difficulties in the execution of a favorite scheme. Jones, however, persisted in declining the undertaking, which had not, indeed, the least probability of success. He easily perceived the motives which induced Mrs. Fitzpatrick to be so eager in pressing her advice. He said he would not deny the tender and passionate regard he had for Sophia, but was so conscious of the inequality of their situations that he could never flatter himself so far as to hope that so divine a young lady would condescend to think on so unworthy a man. Nay, he protested, he could scarce bring himself to wish she should. He concluded with a profession of generous sentiments, which we have not at present leisure to insert. There are some fine women, for I dare not here speak in too general terms, with whom self is so predominant that they never detach it from any subject. And as vanity is with them a ruling principle, they are apt to lay hold of whatever praise they meet with, and, though the property of others, convey it to their own use. In the company of these ladies, it is impossible to say anything handsome of another woman which they will not apply to themselves. Nay, they often improve the praise they seize. As, for instance, if her beauty, her wit, her gentility, her good humor deserve so much commendation, what do I deserve, who possess those qualities in so much more eminent a degree? To these ladies, a man often recommends himself while he is commending another woman. And, while he is expressing ardor and generous sentiments for his mistress, they are considering what a charming lover this man would make to them, who can feel all this tenderness for an inferior degree of merit. Of this, strange as it may seem, I have seen many instances besides Mrs. Fitzpatrick, to whom all this really happened, and who now began to feel a somewhat for Mr. Jones, the symptoms of which she much sooner understood than poor Sophia had formerly done. To say the truth, perfect beauty in both sexes is a more irresistible object than it is generally thought. For notwithstanding some of us are contented with more homely lots, and learn by rote, as children to repeat what gives them no idea, to despise outside, and to value more solid charms, yet I have always observed, at the approach of consummate beauty, that these more solid charms only shine with that kind of luster which the stars have after the rising of the sun. When Jones had finished his exclamations, many of which would have become the mouth of Orondates himself, Mrs. Fitzpatrick heaved a deep sigh, and, taking her eyes off from Jones, on whom they had been some time fixed, and dropping them on the ground, she cried, "Indeed, Mr. Jones, I pity you. But it is the curse of such tenderness to be thrown away on those who are insensible of it. I know my cousin better than you, Mr. Jones, and I must say, any woman who makes no return to such a passion and such a person is unworthy of both." "Sure, madam," said Jones. "You can't mean," cries Mrs. Fitzpatrick. "I know not what I mean. There is something, I think, in true tenderness bewitching. Few women ever meet with it in men, and fewer still know how to value it when they do. I never heard such truly noble sentiments, and I can't tell how it is, but you force one to believe you. Sure, she must be the most contemptible of women who can overlook such merit." The manner and look with which all this was spoke infused a suspicion into Jones, which we don't care to convey in direct words to the reader. Instead of making any answer, he said, "I am afraid, madam, I have made too tiresome a visit," and offered to take his leave. "Not at all, sir," answered Mrs. Fitzpatrick. "Indeed, I pity you, Mr. Jones. Indeed, I do. But if you are going, consider of the scheme I have mentioned. I am convinced you will approve it, and let me see you again as soon as you can tomorrow morning if you will, or at least some time tomorrow. I shall be at home all day." Jones, then, after many expressions of thanks, very respectfully retired. Nor could Mrs. Fitzpatrick forbear making him a present of a look at parting, by which if he had understood nothing, he must have had no understanding in the language of the eyes. In reality, it confirmed his resolution of returning to her no more. For, faulty as he hath hitherto appeared in this history, his whole thoughts were now so confined to his Sophia, that I believe no woman upon earth could have now drawn him into an act of inconstancy. Fortune, however, who was not his friend, resolved, as he intended to give her no second opportunity, to make the best of this, and accordingly produced the tragical incident which we are now in sorrowful notes to record. Chapter 10. The consequence of the preceding visit. Mr. Fitzpatrick, having received the letter before mentioned from Mrs. Western, and being by that means acquainted with the place to which his wife was retired, returned directly to Bath, and thence the day after set forward to London. The reader hath been already often informed of the jealous temper of this gentleman. He may likewise be pleased to remember the suspicion which he had conceived of Jones at Upton, upon his finding him in the room with Mrs. Waters. And though sufficient reasons had afterwards appeared entirely to clear up that suspicion, yet now the reading so handsome a character of Mr. Jones from his wife caused him to reflect that she likewise was in the inn at the same time, and jumbled together such a confusion of circumstances in a head which was naturally none of the clearest, that the whole produced that green-eyed monster mentioned by Shakespeare in his tragedy of Othello. And now, as he was inquiring in the street after his wife, and had just received directions to the door, unfortunately Mr. Jones was issuing from it. Fitzpatrick did not yet recollect the face of Jones. However, seeing a young, well-dressed fellow coming from his wife, he made directly up to him, and asked him what he had been doing in that house. "For I am sure," said he, "you must have been in it, as I saw you come out of it." Jones answered very modestly that he had been visiting a lady there. To which Fitzpatrick replied, "What business have you with the lady?" Upon which Jones, who now perfectly remembered the voice, features, and indeed coat of the gentleman, cried out, "Ha, my good friend! Give me your hand. I hope there is no ill blood remaining between us upon a small mistake which happened so long ago." "Upon my soul, sir," said Fitzpatrick, "I don't know your name nor your face." "Indeed, sir," said Jones, "neither have I the pleasure of knowing your name, but your face I very well remember to have seen before at Upton, where a foolish quarrel happened between us, which if it is not made up yet, we will now make up over a bottle." "At Upton!" cried the other. "Ha! Upon my soul, I believe your name is Jones." "Indeed," answered he, "it is." "Oh." "Upon my soul," cries Fitzpatrick, "you are the very man I wanted to meet. Upon my soul, I will drink a bottle with you presently. But first, I will give you a great knock over the pate. There is for you, you rascal. Upon my soul, if you do not give me satisfaction for that blow, I will give you another." And then, drawing his sword, put himself in a posture of defense, which was the only science he understood. Jones was a little staggered by the blow, which came somewhat unexpectedly, but presently recovering himself he also drew, and though he understood nothing of fencing, pressed on so boldly upon Fitzpatrick that he beat down his guard and sheathed one half of his sword in the body of the said gentleman, who had no sooner received it than he stepped backwards, dropped the point of his sword, and leaning upon it, cried, "I have satisfaction enough. I am a dead man." "I hope not," cries Jones, "but whatever be the consequence, you must be sensible you have drawn it upon yourself." At this instant, a number of fellows rushed in and seized Jones, who told them he should make no resistance, and begged some of them at least would take care of the wounded gentleman. "Aye," cries one of the fellows, "the wounded gentleman will be taken care enough of, for I suppose he hath not many hours to live. As for you, sir, you have a month at least good yet." "D-n me, Jack," said another, "he hath prevented his voyage, he's bound to another port now." And many other such jests was our poor Jones made the subject of by these fellows, who were indeed the gang employed by Lord Fellamar, and had dogged him into the house of Mrs. Fitzpatrick, waiting for him at the corner of the street when this unfortunate accident happened. The officer who commanded this gang, very wisely, concluded that his business was now to deliver his prisoner into the hands of the civil magistrate. He ordered him, therefore, to be carried to a public house, where, having sent for a constable, he delivered him to his custody. The constable, seeing Mr. Jones very well dressed, and hearing that the accident had happened in a duel, treated his prisoner with great civility, and at his request dispatched a messenger to inquire after the wounded gentleman, who was now at a tavern under the surgeon's hands. The report brought back was that the wound was certainly mortal, and there were no hopes of life. Upon which the constable informed Jones that he must go before a justice. He answered, "Wherever you please, I am indifferent as to what happens to me, for though I am convinced I am not guilty of murder in the eye of the law, yet the weight of blood I find intolerable upon my mind." Jones was now conducted before the justice, where the surgeon who dressed Mr. Fitzpatrick appeared, and deposed that he believed the wound to be mortal, upon which the prisoner was committed to the gatehouse. It was very late at night, so that Jones would not send for Partridge till the next morning, and as he never shut his eyes till 7, so it was near 12 before the poor fellow, who was greatly frightened at not hearing from his master so long, received a message which almost deprived him of his being when he heard it. He went to the gatehouse with trembling knees and a beating heart, and was no sooner arrived in the presence of Jones than he lamented the misfortune that had befallen him with many tears, looking all the while frequently about him in great terror. For as the news now arrived that Mr. Fitzpatrick was dead, the poor fellow apprehended every minute that his ghost would enter the room. At last he delivered him a letter, which he had like to have forgot, and which came from Sophia by the hands of Black George. Jones presently dispatched every one out of the room, and having eagerly broke open the letter, read as follows: "You owe the hearing from me again to an accident which I own surprises me. My aunt hath just now shown me a letter from you to Lady Bellaston, which contains a proposal of marriage. I am convinced it is your own hand, and what more surprises me is, that it is dated at the very time when you would have me imagine you was under such concern on my account. I leave you to comment on this fact. All I desire is, that your name may never more be mentioned to S.W. Of the present situation of Mr. Jones's mind, and of the pangs with which he was now tormented, we cannot give the reader a better idea than by saying, his misery was such that even Thwackum would almost have pitied him. But bad as it is, we shall at present leave him in it, as his good genius, if he really had any, seems to have done. And here we put an end to the 16th book of our history.